Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 114. A guten Iyar and a guten Tamid. Let me begin first with some technical information, which I often remind everyone that this extraordinary experience of MyLife, Chassidus Applied, is only possible through the partnership between you and us. So please, submit your questions at meaningfullife.com/mylife. And you can be anonymous. You can write to us as well with your name if you want to have a personal response. And please share with others. As well as if you value MyLife Chassidus Applied, please subscribe to our YouTube channel of the same name. We've created a special channel now, MyLife Chassidus Applied, due to the popularity and the growth of this series, to help keep these videos coming and to share them with others. Also, anyone interested in sponsoring an episode, please go to meaningfullife.com/mylife, and you'll see there the ability to honor someone, a loved one, or a memory of someone, to sponsor one of these episodes or more than one. Okay, with that, let us begin as we do with what is man grama, timely, since it's Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and we're going toward Beis, which is the Rebbe Marash's birthday, Tiferes Rebbe Tiferes, on Tuesday. And next Shabbos is Shabbos Parsha Kedoshim. A few words about all these matters in the context of Chassidus Applied. Let's start with Kedoshim, the Parsha of the week. So here in Kedoshim, you actually see two things that are extremely relevant to the entire theme of applying this to our lives. And I should also not neglect to mention that we're coming from 25 years of Chof Ches Nisan this past Friday, where the Rebbe instructed us and gave us the marching orders, which we still have to fulfill. That I give it over to all of you, each of you, to bring Mashiach, to come put your heads together and do whatever is possible. Words similar to what the Rebbe said in Purim Tavshem Mem Zayin. I just listened to it actually a little earlier, and it's always important to hear it again and again. You always hear different nuances, new points, and the sikha, both in the third and fourth sikha of that Purim Fabrengen. Listen also to the fourth sikha, where the Rebbe talks about some of the signs and some of the negative and positive things that we see, making it even easier to introduce Mashiach to everyone and to do everything possible there. He says again those words, everyone is given this job. The video is going around now, what happened this Sunday, after Chof Ches Nisan, when a woman pleading and crying from her heart to the Rebbe, Rebbe, we can't do it. It's impossible. You can't drop. You can't leave us hanging. And the Rebbe very adamantly says that if I am a Rebbe, those words, then I'm telling you clearly what that you have to do. I'm pointing to her and to the others, you, and you. So it's as clear as day that we have a job to do. So in that context, Kedoshim Tiyu captures an essential theme of Chassidus in general, Chassidus Applied in particular, and shows also the Chiddush of Chassidus. So there's the famous Teres Keinim, Sifra, which is Medrash on Vayikra, on Kedoshim, that goes like this. The Pasuk says, Kedoshim Tiyu, Ki Kodesh Ani. So the Medrash says the following. The Medrash says, Kedoshim Tiyu Yochel Kemeni. You could think, Kedoshim Tiyu, you should be sanctified like I am. Kedoshim Tiyu, you should sanctify yourselves. Yochel Kemeni. You could think that you can be as holy as I am. Talmud Leimer Ki Kodesh Ani. Comes the next verse. What is the addition of the second half? That because I am holy. Kedushasi Lamayla Mekdushaschem. My holiness is greater than yours. So it's a qualification. It's a qualification. You may think that you could be as holy as I am, as God is. Qualification. Comes Chassidus and teaches it, turns it around, literally turns it around, and says the following: Yochel Kameni, b'nechusa, not like a question. The Yitaka could be Kameni. You can be as holy as I am. Why? Because my holiness above, Lamaila Kedushasi Lamaila is Mekdushaschem. That's how you read it. Comes from your holiness. By you sanctifying your life, you're sanctifying God, which of course requires the Biyurim explanations of Chassidus, that God is beyond Kedusha, beyond, doesn't need anything. What do you mean, Ki Kodesh Ani? It doesn't need. But we were given the gift and the ability, like the Rebbe said, Chav Chesnis, that we, each one of us, even in our whatever level we are, we can actually increase and add holiness, even Kav to heaven itself, to the divine itself. That's one very powerful taich. Second point is the Ramban, Nachmanides, on the Pasuk, back almost 1,000 years ago. He writes that what is the Pasuk coming to add? We all know Kedoshim Tiyu is said numerous times in Torah. In Parsha Shmini, Viskadashtem V'yisim Kedoshim, sanctify yourselves. V'atam Tili Mamlechas Kain V'goy Kodesh. Everywhere the Torah is saying it's all about sanctity. Kedushasi, Kedushas HaMitzvahs, Kedushas HaTorah, Asher Kedushana B'mitzvahs V'tzivanu. All the mitzvahs come to sanctify. What is this particular verse coming to add? That you shall be sacred. You shall sanctify yourself. That is not said and not indicated from other places where it tells us to be holy. And he brings the expression that is famous today, novel b'reshus HaTorah, that the pasuk is coming to particularly negate a very particular obnoxious element. A novel is a manuvel. A manuvel is an obnoxious, despicable person that does it b'reshus HaTorah. So other places in the Torah says Kedusha is talking in general to sanctify. But the Torah feels it necessary to come to qualify that there are individuals who sometimes use Torah, God forbid, to justify and to hide behind their own obnoxious and despicable behavior. And that's what the Torah is coming to tell us. That Kedoshim Tiyu, do not do that. Even the times of Ramban, things like that existed, that type of dissonance, where a person uses Torah. It's one thing, a person doesn't use Torah, fine, they need correction. But once you start using Torah to justify something that's novel, manuvel, that is one of the worst types of desecration. So one could ask the question, the Ramban's interpretation seems to be speaking about the lowest type of person. The types of the Chassidus in Kedushas, the Ma'alim Kedushas seems to be talking about a very exalted state where we have the power to sanctify above. Well, that's connected. Just like we have the power to sanctify heaven, we also have the power to desecrate heaven. It's called Achil Hashem. Achil Hashem, one of the worst possible things, because once you create an impression of something that desecrates, it's very hard to go back and say, hey, you know something, I didn't mean it. Because it's not just between you and God, it's now you've affected other people, have seen something. So when a person who people think is a person of God, or a person who's following God, behaves in a way that's the antithesis of that, in many ways it's much worse than someone that doesn't seem to appear to be so-called a holy person. Rab Chia would not purchase, the Gemara says, meat on credit, because he did not want anyone to get the impression that he's leaving the butcher without paying. Because on his level, that's Achil Hashem. The Rebbe once explained Moshe Rabbeinu. What was considered Achil Hashem? Moshe Rabbeinu, instead of speaking to the rock, he hit the rock. What's the story? The first time the Eibishter told him to hit the rock in Bishalach, it produced water. The next time the Eibishter said to speak to the rock. He tried to speak, it didn't work, so he hit the rock. Why? Because he remembered the first time. Now think about it a moment. It's just as miraculous to extract water from a stone by speaking as it is with the hitting. So what was exactly his sin? The sin was that Moshe changed something that Eibishter said. And for that level of Moshe Rabbeinu, for many people, people would say, hey, 1 second, rocks don't produce water. That wasn't the issue here. For many people, this would have been a continuing Kiddush Hashem, because they're following, they're not speaking, they're listening, they're hitting the rock. But for Moshe to make one shift, as the Rebbe says often, that a mashpia has to behave double or triple amount of what he asks his mushpoyim, his or her students or people they influence. Because everyone is going to say, if my teacher does it so much, I could cut 0.5% of that. The Rebbe brings it also in context of the Frierdiker Rebbe, why he insisted not to travel by train when they were to release him after Yud Beis Tammuz, which was on a Thursday, because he didn't want to create a Chil Hashem. Even though Pi Halacha, Pekuach Nefesh, number one, so that even Safek Pekuach Nefesh is derech Shabbos. Secondly, once you start traveling on Thursday or Wednesday, there are different, it's not necessarily any issue here. It didn't start on Friday. And yet, because he was the Rebbe, and he knew that everyone would be mefursim, would be publicized, what he did, and he knew they may even use it, because of that impression of the Chil Hashem, that a Rebbe is traveling on Shabbos, didn't do that. So what the concept is, basically, going back to Chassidus Applied, we are charged with being refined human beings. Refined human being is this, as the Medrash says on the pasuk V'haftas Hashem Elokecha. The Sifri says, love. So the simple interpretation is V'haftas Hashem Elokecha. You shall love God. B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. Sifri says V'hafta. You should make misahev al yodecha. That God should be beloved through you. That when people see you, they say, godly person. This is a God I can love. And you could even argue that most people's rejection of God and rejection of God's interests and God's plan is not of God. It's how people presented God to them. So the idea of Chassidus is living up to the standards in the ways of Kedoshim to you, and definitely not the opposite of using it in the wrong way. And this affects every part of our society. It affects how we treat our friends, issues of Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, as opposed to, God forbid, the opposite, machlekes and so on. It affects how we deal with our children, how we are, in general, carry ourselves as human beings. They're saturated with Chassidus is Kedoshim to you. Which brings us to the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe coined, and even though the Rebbe Marash is the one that said L'chatchila Ribber, but the Rebbe identified, and sometimes referred to the Rebbe Marash as L'chatchila Ribber. The Maimorim from L'chatchila Ribber, the Rebbe said a number of times. What is it based on? It's based on the Pizgim, the word from the Rebbe Marash. What is the word? The word is that the Welt sagt, amikenish darunter, geht men arriba. Und ich sage, l'chatchila arriba. The world says if you can't go below, then you go above. In other words, option one is try to go below. You can't go below, then you go above. Meaning to try to get through an impediment or anything of that nature, which we'll talk about in a moment. Ich sage, l'chatchila initially arriba. The Rebbe connects it with the Rebbe Marash's behavior, even his life. He behaved in a way of affluence and prosperity. Some Chassidic got a gift of a precious stones or whatever it may be. He gave it to the Rebbe Marash. That was his minhag derech. The Rebbe sometimes compared it to the Baal Shem Tov, Baal Shem Skan Hage, Chatchila Riber, and turned it into the theme of the Rebbe Marash. I don't know if any studies have ever been done to see when you see it in the Chassidus of the Rebbe Marash. I think the Rebbe did once say that Rebbe Marash was the first to make Hemshechim. Hemshech Mayim Rabim Tafresh Lamed Vov, Hemshech V'Koch V'Tafresh Lamed Zayin. There's Hemshechim Tafresh Mem. The idea of a flow of Maimorim, not just one, which can be seen as a L'chatchila Rebbe. It's also interesting that the Rebbe, the Sefer HaTeldus, the stories of the Rebbe Marash, the biography of the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe himself composed. So there's a particular connection. The Rebbe, every time he would tell the story, tears would well up. When he told that when the Frierdiker Rebbe visited Israel and he came off the boat, so the Chassidim, there were Chassidim there. Some of them were Chassidim, the Rebbe Marash. And one of them fainted when he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe. He says, who? Like he saw, this is the Rebbe Marash. So there's a deep connection. Obviously, every Rebbe has his particular contribution, but L'chatchila Rebbe became a central theme in the Rebbe with the niggin of the Rebbe Marash, which was once called Ein Tzvei Dreifir, became L'chatchila Rebbe. That's the Pizgim, which of course is very consistent with Kedoshim. Kedoshim to you, L'mash Kedushasi, L'mayla Mekdush Aschem. That meaning that what is L'mayla comes to Kedusha. What more L'chatchila Rebbe is than that? That we have that power, that ability. What it means in practical terms, as the Rebbe said very often, that when we take on challenges in life, the way we're supposed to deal with challenges in life, you can deal with a challenge, you know what, let me deal with it head on, try to maneuver, try to go and negotiate. And the Rebbe is saying there's another approach which the Rebbe Marash introduced, L'chatchila Rebbe. Go L'chatchila as if there's no impediment. Go with a breitkeit, with a certain expansiveness and a certain confidence and courage. Instead of having to deal with, obviously this doesn't mean stepping on someone, it doesn't mean that you don't negotiate and deal with if that is sometimes necessary. But it means in general, instead of thinking in terms of counting pennies, think of big scale. Go L'chatchila Rebbe. You believe in something, go all the way. And this, of course, can be applied to many different attitudes, especially psychological attitudes. When you go like a winner, as you enter any situation like a winner, it's a whole different attitude than if you go and say, you know what, maybe I'll try this way, I'll try that way, I'll try that way. If that doesn't work, I'll try another option. Now, it's interesting, the Welt sagt, mekenish darunter, geht men arriba, welche Welt sagt es? So it's been pointed out, and I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but I remember when we worked in Sefer Lekutim, which was back in 1978, Tov Shel Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches, Lametes, till Mem Gimel, when all the books came out. So we discovered many fascinating things in the Tzemach Tzedek's Iyar Torah. That Iyar Torah is one of these closed books that most people are not aware of. And one of the things we discovered was this expression. So let me refer them to you, and I'll give you a little more details about it, because it's interesting to compare it to the Marash's approach. So the Tzemach Tzedek, who also often quotes, of course, the Alter Rebbe. So firstly, let's begin with a maimer in Iyar Torah Nach, on Yeshaya, on the Pasuk, and the Shimus of the Tzemach Tzedek, on the Pasuk of Amach Kulim Tzadikim. So he's talking about Tzadikim Balei Tshuva, and then he says at the end, V'zeu kamoshel hanisker. This is like the example. This is page Reish Peches 288, if you want to look it up, Iyar Torah Nach. This is like the moshel that is mentioned, the Save Dibra Maskal Shuvi Yisrael, the end of the Maimer Shuvi Yisrael. I'll tell you which one in a moment. As mekenit arunter, muzman ariber. In Yiddish. Which Maimer is he referring to? He's referring to Shuvi Yisrael Tov Kuf Samachei, is in page 913, volume 2 of Tov Kuf Samachei of the Maimori Admur HaZoken. So it's not Likutei Torah, it's the Shuvi Yisrael of that year. There he doesn't say it in Yiddish, there he says it in Hebrew. There's also a Maimer of Shuvi Yisrael, the Mittel Rebbe, Tov Kuf Pei Vov, which is printed today in the Maimorim of Shabbos Shuvah in the Sefer Dvorim, which also discusses this point. And it's interesting, even the Rebbe Rashab has a Maimer, Shirim Malz Mama Makim, Tofrei Samach Dalet, page 360, also mentions it. So that's the Alter Rebbe's expression, Kenit Arunta, Gitman Ariber. Clearly, the original approach is Arunta. If not that, is Ariber. So it's not just the Welt. It's the Welt that happens to be the Welt as the Alter Rebbe is speaking. And then there's an Iyar Torah, Megillah Esther. Megillah Esther, on page, in the new version, in the new print, it's page 45. In the old print, it was page 2,300. That's because the pages followed Iyar Torah Shmos. When they reissued it, they made a separate volume and started pages from 1. That's why the discrepancy. So what does he say here? Here he speaks about also Tshuva, and he talks about Esther. Then he goes and says the following expression. I'll just read it directly inside. He brings Shirmas Mamakim v'Tshuva Sha'omar Tomid. He adds the word Tomid. The Alter Rebbe would say constantly. There are a few places you find Meragli, Bepuma, and some things that the Alter Rebbe would say. Sha'omar Tomid, they always say Beloshen Yiddish, as mekenit arunter, muzman ariber. Again, you can look this up in the pages I just mentioned. It's a Maimer Inyan Esther, a Megillah Esther. So we have these things. Comes the Alter Rebbe Marash and says, the Welt sagt, am mekenit arunter geit man ariber. Now it's much deeper than just the Welt. It's the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. And ich sag, am daf mechatchil ariber. So this adds a whole dimension. Why is how we know that Rabbeim, obviously the Alter Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaGadol is the Yisod of Chassidus Chabad. But clearly, as time passes, we increase and we grow. And it could be due to the times, it could be getting closer to Mashiach. There are many ways to explain it, but clearly, it's an addition. Now, obviously, we know all the Rabbeim are one thing, and if I bring in Beis Iyar, Tovshin Yud, Shabbos Pasha Vayet, Yud Kislev Tovshin Yud. Shabbos Pasha Vayetze Yud Kislev Tovshin Yud, the Rebbe said, all the Rabbeim are one thing. So the Rebbe Marash is the Alter Rebbe in his Tkufa. So it's not some type of, God forbid, disagreement. It's a growth, and the Rebbe turned it into something that we are today. This is a Seder Achaim L'chatchila Rebbe. As a matter of fact, we didn't know the source of the Rebbe Marash's Pisgam until the Igris Kedosh of the Frierdiker Rebbe came out. And now we have it in volume 1, in the Igris Kedosh, page 617. It was always the Rebbe would bring it in Sichos. One Fabrengen, I recall, I think it was in Tovshin Lamed Beis, I think Lamed Beis Iyar, or Shchedeshir, Ever Shchedeshir, the Rebbe said, Azebich gehet from Shver. So clearly the Rebbe heard it directly from the Frierdiker Rebbe. We have it today, as I said, in the Igris Kedosh of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So it's a direction in life, and it definitely applies to Chassidus. Chassidus today is teaching us not to fight the battles. We know the Maggid's son said to the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, there was the disagreements of how to teach the Baal Shem Tov's Teiros. The Alter Rebbe had his approach. So the Maggid's son, and Beis Rebbe says, the Rabbi Avram HaMalach, which is the Maggid's son, said to the Alter Rebbe, for kucken stav de Pferd. Meaning, we don't dwell and we don't consume ourselves. As the Rebbe says often about different challenges. Hes chadas. Move forward. Vayuso. Don't spend our time like the 4 different camps that broke into a philosophical argument. What should you do when they were between a rock and a hard place? The ocean, the Red Sea before them and the Egyptians behind them. So some said, let's fight the Egyptians. Some said, let's go back to Egypt. Some said, let's jump into the water. Some said, let's pray. No, vayuso. This is a lechatchila riber approach. And it's an approach, a psychological approach to life, which is instead of parkenzach, instead of getting involved, a mesavik in manuval, meaning getting involved with this detail and that detail, just bring light into the picture. Obviously, we sometimes have to work certain things out. But the attitude has to be forge ahead. Because you start dwelling on things. And whether it's collectively like tragedies like the Holocaust, or personally things that happen to us, the dwelling itself traps you. Even if you're trying to get out of it, it consumes you, it overwhelms you, and so on. So the approach by Yusov of l'chatchila riber, instead of going arunta l'chatchila riber, is that's the approach to all these matters, and therefore it has so many applications in dealing with our different challenges. Obviously, this has to be applied for each person in their particular circumstances. So this is some lessons from Kedoshim, from Beis Iyar, that I think can apply to each one of us, whatever it is that we are dealing with. Okay. I want to say one more thing. I remember Tov Mem, very powerful Fabrengen, Yud Gimel Tishrei Tov Mem. If you ever want to listen to something else, listen to this Fabrengen. It's the Yostalkos, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Marash. So among many things, many Giluyim in that Fabrengen, the Rebbe, closer to the end, brought the psyche that Rebbe Marash, the Frierdiker Rebbe brings it in the name of the Rebbe Marash, that he said, the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid is Keser. Baal Shem Tov is Atik and the Magid is Arich. The Alter Rebbe is Chochmeh. The Mittler Rebbe is Bina. The Tate is Das. Tzemach Tzedek is Das. And then the end of the Sikhe, the Rebbe Marash says, und itzter darf von vorn zum Taten und Herren was tut sich. And now we have to travel to the Father to hear what's going on. So the Rebbe asked, what's the connection between the first half with the Sfiris and the end of the statement? The Rebbe's answer. Because Das, Chassidus explains, is the Kavem Tzoi. It's Eile Ada Keser. So if you want to know Herren was tutzach, what means was tutzach? In other words, what's really going on, the story behind the story, the inside story behind the scenes, what you have to do is you go to Da, Dafen gehen vorn zum Taten. So Das. So Herren was tutzach in Keser. So Herren was tutzach in Primius Keser all the way the Baal Shem Tov. Which again shows your connection. Das, of course, is the Tzemach Tzedek, Maftech the Kol Shis, and he had 6 sons. Rebbe Marash, the Mamala Mokim, vorn zum Das, in order to connect to Keser. So for Vusa de Milsa, I added that as well. Let us now go, since we're talking on the topic, questions keep coming in. We can't handle them every week. And thank God people have been writing more than ever. But especially one theme that keeps being a consistent theme in different angles is the role of a Rebbe himself. I've discussed this many different episodes dedicated to this. Yud Aleph Nissen episode was dedicated to this. Gimel Tammuz last year. And different times that we speak about this topic. But since it's a recurrent one and obviously very relevant because we want to know what the Rebbe's role is in our lives today. So I want to just talk about 1-2 points, questions on this topic, even though, as I said, I've talked, but since there are more questions, I'll take a little different angle and rely on the previous episodes, which you can easily look up and find where it was already discussed. And what is that? Let's go to the question. I've learned that there's an extension of Moshe in every generation. This is the expression, is pastusha de Moshe b'chol dara v'dara, which is from Tikkun Zeir. And it says obviously in other places as well, but that language is the Tikkun Zeir in every generation, in a physical body. So that basically the leader of every generation is a Spashtus, as an extension of Moshe Rabbeinu. Do we not need a Moshe in a physical body now? Just like in the times of Moshe when he prepared them for their entry into Eretz Yisrael, and Yeshua, successing Moshe, actually led the Jews into the land, is it ludicrous to believe that maybe we are supposed to have a Yeshua to bring us to Mashiach's actual coming? Don't we need the physical manifestation of his pastusha de Moshe, the extension of Moshe, as a leader? What is the halachic precedence and what are the implications of a manig or a nosi ador that is not with us in this physical existence? So yes, this is how we always understood that in every generation there's a pastusha de Moshe. Yet at the same time, we don't just elect or appoint people. God has to send someone appropriate. If Rachmana litzlan, Chaz v'shalom, God forbid, when the Frierdiker Rebbe's Istalkus Yutzvah, there was no Rebbe, our Rebbe didn't exist, it's not just going to appoint people. There has to be someone that's worthy. Thank God the Eibishter did bless that He gave us Shoslam b'chol der v'der, He planted into our generation the Rebbe. So firstly, technically speaking, it's not something just going to look for someone. God has to send. Now, for example, period before the Baal Shem Tov, we say it was a dark time. Who was the Rebbe of the generation before the Baal Shem Tov? So the Tzaddikim Nistarim. There were different leaders in different communities. But I don't know if you could define an Nasi Hadar necessarily. This doesn't mean there wasn't. And I'm not looking for a precedent. We don't want a precedent. We're not looking for one. But we have to deal with reality. I don't know. We don't know the mysteries of God's ways. So I could not answer. No one expected Gimel Tammuz, and no one expected there shouldn't be a neshama beguf or pastursa demesh. Even those that interpret that there is a neshama beguf, but it's not a guf as we understand it that we can relate to. That's the bottom line. That's the point. So I don't have an answer. This may be a one-time thing in history where maybe God is fulfilling the Rebbe's words that He's leaving it up to us in a certain way. This doesn't mean, as I mentioned a number of times, God forbid, that the Rebbe dropped the ball on us. It means the Rebbe is working through us. And that's His directive. For some reason, there has to be a real Aveda B'Keiach Atzmei. And the ultimate Aveda B'Keiach Atzmei, as the Rebbe said, Chav Ches Nissen, started after Gimel Tammuz, after Chav Zaynod, especially after Gimel Tammuz. So it's a fulfillment of the Rebbe's words, Yud Shvat Tov Shnei Aleph, Retzich Nishtayim Fegelech in Buzim. Don't deceive yourself into thinking that I'm going to do the job for you. We have to do the job. Now, had we done what we had to do, we wouldn't have to have maybe this whole Helam and its concealment and symptom of Gimel Tammuz. But I'm not here to tell you things I don't know. I have no sources and I have no way of explaining the mysteries. I just know we have to focus on what we have to do. So I may not have a full answer for you, but I will say the following, that there's no question that just as the Rebbe leads us, continues to lead us, but maybe He's working through us, as He said, like He said to that woman on Sunday. I, as a Rebbe, I'm telling you, this is what I'm telling you as a Rebbe. So in a way, we are the arms and legs, as the Rebbe said in Gimel Shvat, Tovshin Nun Beis, the 6 weeks before the stroke, that you have to be my mouthpiece. So let's focus on the positive, as I said, L'chatchila Riben. Beyond that, I have nothing more to add to that. All my life, I've been trained to think that a paramount difference between Judaism and other religions is that we believe that everyone has a direct link to God, without the need of any intermediaries. This is in contradistinction to Christianity, Lahavdil, which entertains the notion of a leader, it says Pope here, who is somehow more than a regular human being. Yet throughout the Torah, we find many scenarios where Moshe's direction and interpretation was needed, or where people erred greatly because they took matters into their own hands without consulting with Moshe. Chassidus describes Moshe as a mamutza hamachaber, which means an intermediary that connects. What is the nature of a Nasi Hadar and Rebbe in Judaism, and how is it fundamentally different to leaders in other religions, Lahavdil? So look at the Maimer Ponim B'Ponim Tofresh Nun Tes from the Rebbe Rashab, Ranat, Sefer Mamor Ranat, it's a Shavuos Maimer, where he talks about this issue of Mutza Mechaber and Mamutza Mafsik. A Mamutza means an interface, an intermediary. Now you can have an intermediary, an interface that is Mafsik. It's like there's two entities and this intermediary is a third entity. It connects, but it also separates. Think of it like a pipe that's connecting two other pipes. A maturgaman, a translator. It's a third person, translating something, let's say, from Hebrew to English or English to Hebrew. So he knows both languages, and he translates. But then there's a mamutza machaber. Mamutza machaber will translate into English as a transparent interface. There's no friction, there's no inertia, there's no resistance, there's nothing, it's transparent. So what consists of mamutza? Mamutza is that it gives us an example, a model. Due to its complete utter bittul, which is what Moshe had, it's a model of how we should be divine people in this world. God forbid that it replaces. As you said very clearly, we do not believe in any type of, there's only one God. And there are no interfaces, intermediaries. But a transparent one where a person doesn't have any ego, doesn't have a self. So all he is helping you connect to God. Now, would you need the help? As the Alter Rebbe writes in the letter recently discovered, when he writes to the Tsar's ministers when they arrested him, one of the questions, what do you need a Rebbe? Because we are subjective human beings, we have egos, we have self-interest, and just like I say, L'charav, V'aiminu ba'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdei. What do you need a Moshe avdei? Why the Rav? because you need something objective that will give you a view that is not based on subjective prejudices and sheikhet, which, by the way, in the Sikha Purim Mem Zayin, that second Sikha that I mentioned, the fourth Sikha of Purim Mem Zayin, talks about this at length. So now, of course, I said the Charav in the Mishnah can be any mentor, but a Rebbe of a generation, is that type of shliach of the Eibishter. Now, the Eibishter could have taken the Jews out of Mitzrayim, just like he could take us out of Golus without anyone. But he wants something that we can relate to, which is really goes to the whole concept of Chassidus. Why do you need Atzilus? Ani mespal l'daza atinuk, as the Rivash brings in the Tzemach Tzedek sites in Sheish Misatel. I pray straight to God. Why are you telling me about all the spheres and that there's a Hagodla, Giber V'Haneda, and the Eibishter has all these different levels, the divine expressions? Because we need something on our terms, stepping stones to relate to. Of course we can just connect, but then it will be on a very minimal sense. So you have teachers, you have educators, you have mentors, and you have a Rebbe that help you relate to the divine, and then that helps you directly make that link to the Eibishter. Now here's not the place to go into all the details of it, but the key word is bittul. Ultimate bittul. It's not about the Rebbe and the entity. It's about utter selfless transparency that allows that to happen. Should there be one tinge of lack of that, then you have a problem. Which is why Shmuel did not want to appoint a king, as the Tzemach Tzedek explains in Mitzvahs Minui Melech and Derech Mitzvah, and I suggest you look that up. Why did he want to appoint a king? The Jews wanted a king. Because it says them Sum Tasim Alecha Melech, appoint a king, because he says they wanted a king not for what the Torah. The Torah is saying a king because of bittul, so you should have someone that can help you recognize what it is to be divine and get it beyond your own subjective biases and prejudices. They wanted it for national reasons. They saw other people with kings. It was more for pride, for ego. Then he went to the Eibishter and told them, and the Eibishter said, appointed anyway. That was Shaul HaMelech. There he explains what Malchus is. Malchus of Atzilus is the embodiment of a Melech and ultimately the embodiment of a Rebbe. Deir Ashvi Rebbe for sure. And its whole thing is less lo megan mo klum. It has nothing of its own. But it's still something to teach us how to have nothing of your own. As I said, we can elaborate more. There are deeper explanations as well, but this suffices for now in answering those two questions. And there are more questions. As I said, I'll scatter them on different weeks and different episodes as we go through them, as they come in, because it's a question, as I say, I see again and again, is being addressed. So let's suffice for now. Let's move to the next question. Since we're in a year of elections, some questions came in about the presidential election. Voting for president. Facing the upcoming elections, is it a Jew's responsibility to vote? What criteria should one look for in a candidate? Is it their support for Israel, their ability to lead, their integrity? Read a few questions, quick questions here. After following many presidential elections, it's clear that many times candidates run with many plans and proposals. One questioner writes. Yet once elected, don't necessarily follow through. Democrats pass conservative bills and Republicans pass liberal ones. It seems that God determines what a president will accomplish, not the president's ideologies. Is it true that it doesn't really matter who is president because God is running the show either way? If it doesn't matter who the leader is, then why do the Alter Rebbe so adamantly oppose Napoleon's regime? Another questioner asks, facing the upcoming elections... Oh, I just read that question. Okay. So yes, good question. And another question that came in this regard is, why worry about the election if God is running the show? Okay. Somewhat of a detail in this whole... Very good questions. Let me respond. My response is based on sikhs of the Rebbe, especially in the Lameds and the Mems, where the Rebbe actually spoke a number of times in context of letters he received from the Nasi, the Medina, which is the President Reagan especially, and others. And we have letters, we have different communications, and we also have Farbrengens, where the Rebbe spoke, especially Yud Aleph Nissen Farbrengens, which was designated as Education Day, and greetings were sent to the Rebbe's birthday, where the Rebbe responded in thanking and also describing the role and so on. I'll say from my experience in working in Sikhs, based on the Rebbe's criteria, that's how I'll answer. The Rebbe himself voted in elections. I can't say every election, but what I've heard a number of times, he voted. Sometimes it was, early years I think he actually went to vote, and later years it was a write-in ballot. But the Rebbe voted, so clearly and I think he even expressed himself once as this is the obligation of a citizen. Now, as a citizen, why should we not vote? We may have an impact. You could say you don't think one vote will matter, but then every voter can say that. So I would say, is it a chiyuv min ateda to vote? It's not a crime not to vote in this country. So din machusa din doesn't mean you must vote, but especially if Rabbonim and a community comes out together that we need a block because we want to support a certain candidate, so then obviously we follow that. But even on an individual level, as I said from the Rebbe did exercise that citizen's right to vote. So in general, yes, that has to be the answer to that. What criteria? Now, being Torah Jews, Chassidic Jews, the criteria is Torah criteria. We're dealing here obviously with Dinah Malchus Dinah, which means a national and a non-Jewish and secular government, and Malchus al Chesed, as the Rebbe puts, United States. We're talking about the United American election. And therefore, what are we looking for in a leader? One that lives up to the Torah standards of what the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei are, as the Rebbe writes in many letters to the presidents, that the pillars of this government, of this country, the Declaration of Independence, are built, the Bill of Rights, on these principles. So you want to have a president that lives up to these principles to the best possible way. Ronald Reagan, of all the presidents, it seemed that the Rebbe, for some reason, was most positive about him, and I believe the reason is because Reagan spoke constantly about God, about values, about traditions. He was unabashed. He wasn't particularly religious. I don't think he went to church, but he spoke about it. He was a big understander of the traditional values that we need to inculcate in our children, in our education. I'm not saying other presidents that, but that seemed to be the main criteria. Someone that talks about God, that talks about moment of silence, that understands that without God there is no morality, which was such a central theme. Essentially, the role, the foundation of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Neach and those principles. Interestingly, Israel, I don't have any recollection, and if someone has some evidence otherwise, please send it in to me, and I'll share it. I have no recollection, not in writing and not in speaking, that Israel, the support of Israel of a candidate, was a factor. Actually, I would say Adarab, on the contrary. Israel, the Rebbe always said, was in Israeli hands. That if the government and Israeli leaders would do what they have to do, the Rebbe always said, the American government will support it. They may yell, they may scream, but behind the scenes, they'll always support it. And you control your own destiny. The Rebbe said it many, many times. He said it by dollars, he said it by fabrengens, he said it in writing, he wrote it in writing, and so on. So, based on that, I would say that didn't really matter. Obviously, a president happens to be more pro-Israel, great, but it was not a factor that would define an election. We had presidents that were not so pro. There were presidents less. Last President Bush was very pro-Israel, and still Israel didn't necessarily do what it had to do. So from the Rebbe's point of view, I would say the main issue was how he runs the country, and the world, of course, relates to the world from a point of view of God's moral laws. And support of Israel was because the country itself supports Israel. And therefore the president will uphold that. But I don't recall anywhere the Rebbe ever referring to voting or not voting for a president due to his stance on Israel. I think another element is people say what they say is just one of the writers' rights, and we don't really know what they stand by anyway. You find Nixon spoke some anti-Semitic stuff we find on his tapes, and yet he was one of the biggest supporters during the Yom Kippur War. Truman supported Israel in a big way, and even though he also did not always speak positively, so you can't really make a conclusion based on what people say and what we know their public record is. Now, one more thing I want to address is, of course, the issue of Leiv Sodim Malachim B'Yad Hashem. There's an expression, Leiv Sodim Malachim, the hearts of kings and Sodim and ministers in the hands of God. God appoints leaders, yes. And that's where you'll find in Teda Shalom and other places that leaders have to do with the divine plan. And that's exactly why the Alter Rebbe was mispal and woke up early to blow shofar early, that Rosh Hashanah, the last year of his Chaim Chayusi Baal Medain, because he recognized that Napoleon was maybe good begashmis Frieden, but not beruchnis. And Alexander of Russia would be good beruchnis. If the Eibishter runs the show, why did he daven? The Eibishter will do what is necessary. Because for some reason, the Eibishter wants us to be partners. Just like we spal for a full shlema, or we pray for other things, the Eibishter wants us to be partners. And in the way a Rebbe on earth is seeing b'derech hateva that this man is going to be good for better for Jews than another, he's mispal. Would the Eibishter have made Alexander win anyway? Could be. But the fact of the matter is that's not a contradiction. You find this constantly. So on one hand, yes, we have to know that God leads the way, but we don't know what God's plan is. So when we look at them, we see a president that is good for the Jewish cause, or good for, I would say, not just the Jewish cause, for the moral cause, then that's what we have to vote for. We can't just say, I'm going to stay home and let God decide. The end of the day is we do elect presidents. So it's not a contradiction. Should we be concerned about an election? Yes, at the end of the day, you see from this nominees from this election that we are dealing with, without going into pros or cons, you see no one expected Trump to become the presidential candidate for the Republican Party. It's clearly in the hands of God. Did he make the right moves? Fine. But it wasn't even a consideration. It was a joke in the beginning. And this has nothing to do whether he's capable or not. Time will tell. And I'm not pro or against, and don't read anything into my words. But you see clearly that maybe this is Taka's sign that the Eibishter is showing there's a time of transition. You need to disrupt the system, the political systems. And then we say al Medina's Boya Omer on Rosh Hashanah. The Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe made Priyatkis in Petersburg, meaning that they did maneuvers to help define who the leaders are. But it's a partnership, because sometimes the Eibishter chooses that Seder Yehudim, that Rachmana litzlan, Leisukum Pa'amayim, we should never hear about it again, and we will never hear about it again. There were leaders that were the worst possible. Alexander was not good for Jews. The Gashmis. He hated Jews, anti-Semite, as were others. So you say, why didn't the tzaddikim intervene? Maybe they tried. At the end of the day, God runs the show. Parei Melech Mitzrayim. La Yoda Yosef, whether it was a Melech Chodesh or not. Who decided that? God decided that. Okay, that was not an election. The point is, we do our ishtadlus and our effort as much as possible, but at the end of the day, God does run the show. And I think this election is this year clearly that way. But still, we should be looking at the records in that way. I mean, they say today it's the choice of who's worse. Others say not. Some people, I'm not, as I said, I don't want to get into a position here of endorsing, not endorsing. That's not the discussion. It's Chassidus Applied. People ask what the criteria, so I shared that. Good. Next question. Defeating your snooze button. Completely unrelated, new topic. I wouldn't consider myself an unmotivated person. However, when it comes to pulling myself out of bed in the morning, I find it really difficult. I end up snoozing my alarms for a while and eventually get up frustrated with myself and the ringing in my ears. How can I defeat my snooze button? What can I tell myself in the morning to help me get out of bed energetically and not begrudgingly? Okay, well put. A little humorous. My first inclination to be humorous in return is you could always not use your snooze button and just sleep. But obviously that's not the point here. And it's a good question, but all you have to do is open up a Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch seems to have preempted and understood and anticipated this question, even before there were snooze buttons, the difficulty of waking up. So what does it say? That when you wake up, Haverotz Katzvi, Oz Kanemar, Gibber Kari, and Kal Kanesher. The Alter Rebbe brings it in both in his Shulchan Aruch, the beginning, right in the beginning. So it's telling us why. Why does it have to tell us this? Why is it not natural? Because people have the tendency, what's called either snoozing or procrastinating or just lingering or wallowing or whatever you want to call it, in bed. So the mission is the Gemara says, Yehuda ben Tema Imer, Yehuda ben Tema. The Rebbe always talks. Yehuda is the Esis Yud Kevovke, Tema Zok, Tema. That we have to jump out of bed in that type of excitement. To know Shavisi Hashem lenegdi samid. We say Moida ani lefanecha. God has renewed your contract. So the first thing is, let's start with that meditation. If you see your life as a mission, and your contract is renewed, where's there room for snoozing? To be grateful and thankful that God has given you another day. So that's the first thing. You have to pay attention to that. Obviously, we all can gravitate to the easier, lowest common denominator, which is just to hang out. I think I mentioned here, only human beings have this concept called snoozing. For that matter, couch potatoes. Doing nothing. Nothing on earth does nothing. Everything in the world, besides the Baal Bechira, a choice we'll get to in a moment, are always mobile. And even the human being, what's the sign of life? Kol chaim is naneya. Everything that's alive is moving. Your heart is beating, your breath is breathing. Would you like to put your heart, God forbid, in snooze mode? So life is mobile. But we have mastered the art of saying, I did nothing today. And sometimes even feeling like victorious, like it's some success story. A human being is meant to be Kol Adam la'omel yavolad. What were the Rebbe's words when he turned 70 and said, maybe it's time to slow down, retire, you've accomplished so much? Here on earth, Adam Lam Yavol, you were created to produce. It's not about being a workaholic. It's about recognizing with simcha, you're given a mission. You're given a mission. You should jump out of bed to fulfill that mission. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point is we have to find things that are excited in life. If you indeed feel, and guaranteed, you see this constantly, when people know they're going on a trip to a place they're excited to go to, or they're going to do something today, they're going to make $1 million, and they're looking forward to, not only do they jump out of bed, they wake up earlier usually. And you could set your mind better than any alarm clock, and you wake up 6 o'clock on the dot, and you wake up. You see this, remember days in camp and other times when you have that type of anticipation that something special is happening. So we see when something is special happening, you don't need machines and you don't need interventions. If a person, however, is in a state where they have this question, obviously they don't have that type of excitement. So the Chassidic approach to this is, instead of fighting and figuring out how you're going to fight with your snooze button, rather find things that you want to wake up and jump out of bed, which is projects, activities. And if from time to time it may not work, time to time you may be exhausted or something, you want to stay a little, listen, we don't beat ourselves up. But that's an attitude where a person feels that they take on, seize the day, carpe diem, they say, seize the day. In the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch, Ratz Katzfi, Oz Kanemar, Kal Kanesher, and Gibber Kari, whatever order it is. And all four, each one of them has its own particular meditation. So it really comes down to not about how we wake up, it's what we're waking up for. You have something to wake up for, you're excited, guaranteed you won't have this issue. For those of us that do have an issue, so find a project. Do it step by step. Find a project you're excited about, and find a few days at least in the week where you really jump out, you're excited to take on the day. If there are things in life you don't want to wake up to because it's depressing or other things, so in that case, you have to focus, of course, on resolving those issues, because it's not about the sleeping. It's about your issues that are not causing you to be very excited about waking up. So that's my few words on this topic. One more question, and then we have a bunch of follow-up, and I don't even know if we'll get to that, but we'll try. This is a topic that I've addressed many times, sexual urges. Though I try to avoid that word, but sometimes you have to say it because you're dealing with halacha. As the Rebbe says, it comes to halacha, you have to spell it out. So I want to first refer to episodes 4, 12, 13, and many more actually, that I've talked about this, but since the question comes up again, it's one of the questions that come up from time to time. As an unmarried man who wants to be pure before marriage, what can I do to overcome everyday urges I'm experiencing? Well, the Rebbe's answers usually to these things is to try to get married as soon as possible. I know that's a seemingly loaded, obvious answer. Obviously, the question is asking here, meanwhile, I'm not. What do I do then? I'll address that in a moment. What does this mean? This goes back to what I just said about the snooze button. There's two ways to deal with problems. One is dealing with symptoms. You're in pain, something's bleeding, something is hurting, something's aching. You put on a Band-Aid. Another way is preventive medicine, which obviously is always better and healthier. Preventive, you preempt issues. You don't allow it to come up in the first place. You're excited to wake up every morning, you won't have an issue with the snooze button that much. You are excited with your life in a positive way, you're going to have less time for sexual or other urges to distract you. So there comes a point where a person, obviously a marriageable age, has to look into marriage and not hang around and not think that they can overcome every test, because it's not that simple. Marriage is part of your shlichus in this world. And of course marriage prevents this whole issue in the first place, because then it's an eifin of Kedusha and Tara, the way the Torah prescribes it. Now, if you're in a situation where you're in a place where obviously this questioner is asking, so there's also a preventive way, and there's which is more the Chassidic way than there is the direct way. I'm sorry, the symptomatic way. Symptomatic way is, okay, you have urges, what do I do? So you start feeling guilty, sometimes you succumb, and then you feel even more guilty. The Rebbe's approach, Hes Chadas, which I've talked about a number of times, doesn't just mean a simple distract yourself. Obviously, if you have strong urges, how are you going to really distract yourself? It means distract yourself from the concern about it and focus on something positive. Put your energy and passion into something positive. The more excitement you have in your life that's holy and powerful and influencing others, the less time you have to think about this. The less you have going on, then you have this empty kettle. It's a void, a vacuum that always attracts and always causes something to want to fill this void. And often these urges are the ones that come first before anything else. So you must find yourself some things to do And, the more urges, commit to more things. Volunteer, help out, get yourself a project that you can't get out of. And you don't have an ability to escape into your own lonely place where all these urges begin to start messing with you. So that's one thing. There's no magic tricks. The end of the day is we are created this way. People have thoughts. We have thoughts. We try to push them away. We try to, as I said, distract by doing something better. But at the end of the day, these challenges are there. That's how we were created. Hirhuri Aveda, like the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya from Pirkei Avos and from other places, there's things we don't have control over, inadvertent thoughts. But we have control of what to do. Since you're having this challenge, my best advice again is get yourself something you're excited about. Not just something to do, something exciting to do. Generally speaking, energy that goes in a good place weakens energy going to another place. I've talked more about this in previous episodes, so let's suffice for that as well here. Okay. Now, there's a follow-up of a few follow-ups. Let me see here. I'll do at least, let's start with the one, unanswered questions. And I'll leave the others for next episode, okay? Thank you for dealing with the issue of unanswered questions. This is a feedback and follow-up to previous episodes. Sadly, many unanswered questions don't have happy endings. I had friends in yeshiva who would ask questions regarding faith to our mashpim and were repeatedly unanswered. This caused them to leave yeshiva and abandon frumkeit. When we were in yeshiva, the Rebbe was ill. I guess it means after Chav Zayin Adar. We would ask our mashpia what would the significance would be if the Rebbe passed away. He would respond that it was impossible. When the Rebbe did pass, it caused some friends to leave frumkeit. Answering questions seems to me very important and can't be overlooked or shrugged away. Please provide some insight. I appreciate your efforts to answer the questions that come your way. May Hashem continue to give you the strength to do your holy work. As I said then, questions are they come from a healthy place, are part of the healthy growth. The Baal Shem Tov once said, for every question I have an answer, and for every answer there's another question. So it's a journey, questions and answers. It's the way we grow. Children are very inquisitive and curious, and they ask, and we answer. And as we grow, we should ask, and I spoke about the fear kashas, not all of them are answered in the Haggadah. Shailas chacham chatzit tshuva. The question of a wise person is half an answer. So questions are an integral part, but every intelligent person knows you can't answer every question fully at all the time. Now, when you're dealing with students that have questions that are really plaguing them, and you don't answer, just silence, or a stupid answer, or answers that are just turnoffs, obviously that's not what we're talking about. But however, and I've dealt with this many times, people sometimes ask a very complicated, difficult question. And I say to them, we need a few introductions. It may take a few classes, it may take even a half a year. But if you continue to come, I guarantee you we will address your questions. Some people get very upset. It's a cop-out, you just, you can't handle it, etc., etc. But intelligent people, and I always say, listen, you're intelligent enough, I respect your intelligence. You may think it's a cop-out. Why don't you test it and try it? People have been hurt by by teachers and others not answering, or parents. So absolutely that has to be eliminated, because you want to show that we have an answer. But at the same time, we need to know that answers can't always be provided overnight. This questions like this, when children, young impressionables, teenagers, or children are asking questions about the Rebbe, and so on, must be answered. That's why I do MyLife, Chassidus Applied in the first place. The whole thing is based on questions and answers. I try not to shy away from anything. Why? Because precisely, besides the fact that there is an answer to things, it shows that we are not running away. We're not hiding behind some type of childish and crutch or ignorance to preserve our way of life. Questions demonstrate that you're able to ask, you have the courage to ask, at the same time you do your best, and so on. So that's my response to this, and I think educators have to take this to heart, and God forbid we shouldn't have to have fallout like this. To say that it's only simply because questions weren't answered, that's why people leave, it's probably more complicated than that, but I definitely do think, and I've seen it too many times, I give classes, I do never want to have a situation where somebody's sitting there and thinks, oh, another rabbi that's avoiding and evasive and not answering questions. You have to demonstrate that you're embracing questions, you answer to the best of your ability, and sometimes you need more time, and you ask for that permission to be able to elaborate. As I said, there are more topics to be followed up on, and I will leave that because they're a little longer. I'll leave that for the coming episodes. Good. So let's go to the Chassidus Question of the week. Then we'll do the essays. The Chassidus Question of the week is an interesting question. On the cover page of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes that the Tanya is based upon the verse Korev Elecha Hadover Me'ed Befichu B'Lvavcha La'asosei, Pasuk in Etzavim, translated in English, for this thing is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. Explaining, the Alter Rebbe continues, that Tanya, this is what it says, Levayed Heitev, Eich Hu Korev Me'ed B'derech arucha Uktzara B'ezes Hashem Yizbarach. Translated, that this book is based on the verse Korev Elecha Hadover Me'ed, the whole verse, explaining well how it is Korev Me'ed, how it is exceedingly near, but derech arucha ktsara, in both a long and a short way, with God's help. What is the meaning of these seemingly contradictory words, long and short way? Is the way long, or is it short? Is this referring to two different forms of service, as discussed in Tanya, the long way in chapters 16, 17, which is about how contemplation, which is a hard, exerting effort, can lead to waking up emotions, arousing and stimulating emotions, love for God and awe for God. The short way in chapters 18 and on, which talks about revealing the hidden and innate love that every Jew has to God. If so, if it indeed refers to these two, what are the practical differences between the two paths, the ways? Since they're both legitimate methods, how do we know which method to use when? Okay, very practical question in the sense of learning Tanya. So let's begin. There's a sikha from the Rebbe. I remember I wrote the Fabrengen, Tovshim and Beis, Abbas Pasha Sazri, and then afterwards Mitzeda. The Rebbe spoke about this topic, and later it became a sikha in Likutei Sichos Chelik Lamed Dalet, chapter 34, page 173 and on. And there the Rebbe brings in a footnote. And he says exactly this, Yesh Shepirshu. Some people explain the words that the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe says, derech arucha ktsara, the long and short, as two different paths. One that's long, which is, like I said, chapter 16 and 17, and one that's short because it's dealing with the innate revealing. Revealing is always easier than so-called acquiring or initiating or creating. And that's what it means. But the Rebbe writes at the end of there, that he says there, it's more likely that the intention of the Alter Rebbe is to the Loshen Razal, the derech arucha ktsara. So we're talking now about a Gemara in, the Gemara is in Eruvin 53b. So it talks about Omer Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. Tells a story. No one ever really prevailed over me except this child. What happened? Mahi. Once I was traveling on the road, and I saw a child that was sitting at the crossroad, at the fork in the road. I said to him, son, Bni, which way should I get to the city? How do I go to the city? He said to me, this path is long and short. Arucha uktzara, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe. V'zu ktzara arucha, and the other one is short and long. I went in the short and long way. As I got closer to the city, I saw it was surrounded by gardens and by orchards, and I couldn't get through. So I went back to where I began, to the fork in the road. And I said to the boy, you told me it's short. The child said, Rebbe, didn't I also say to you, short but long? That's the Gemara. So the Rebbe is saying it's more likely that the Alter Rebbe is not speaking about two paths. He's speaking about one path. That is arucha viktsara. So not like those that want to say that it means as a derech arucha and the derech tsara, but rather derech arucha uktsara, like the Gemara says. So it's a long path in the sense it takes work, which is the basis of Tanya. But at the end of the day, when you do the work, it ultimately is a short path, because then you're there, and it's sustainable, retainable, and becomes part of who you are. You own it. That's how the Rebbe explains it. So to say that the other interpretation has no value at all, Chassidim interpret it that way, but the Rebbe leans toward this direction, and therefore in response to your question, that's how I would respond to this. As far as the two paths go, look, at the end of the day, arucha ktsara means that there is an element that takes work, and there's another element that reveals. So if you would want to speak in psychological terms, and I talked about this a number of times, is Tanya psychology behavioral or internal, meaning transformative, Behavioral means just change your behavior. Moyach shal tal alev, for example, in the earlier chapters in Tanya. So there's an element of behavioral conditioning, but then there's also an element of cognitive and emotional conditioning. And really it comes to attack it from both directions. So yes, you do what you have to do, and that has impact, and that creates a teva sheni and a second nature and so on. But at the same time, you also work from internal, because we do have an innate love, and that combined ultimately comes down to being a derech arucha uktzara. And you could probably even fit that interpretation that it's long but short also into several different approaches, because Tanya obviously has several approaches in this regard as well. Essays. So let's go now to the 3 essays. These are the next 3 after the top 4 essays of 2016, which I did last week. We're going to do now the next 3 essays, which are all Hebrew, interestingly. All Hebrew essays. So this is basically essay 5, 6, 7 in the marks that were given by the judges. Essay number 1, perfectly imperfect self-acceptance for calm living. Sholem Crombie, age 30, Shliach and Achlaot Yerushalayim. It's a very beautiful essay. Again, all the essays, I should say, are at MyLife, meaningfullife.com/MyLife. I believe /contest is where these essays are, but if you look around there, MyLife, you'll find that. So /contest after meaningfullife.com. And he writes a beautiful essay basically about, in Hebrew, so that idea that one of the big challenges in our day is to find inner peace. And finding inner peace through the using Tanya Chassidus is what this essence of this essay is, which is to recognize that the battle should not disturb us, and it's a simchas hanefesh to know that we are fulfilling the purpose that we were created for, and to avoid the anxieties that people have over things they can't control and over things that are meant that should be part of their lives. That's one part of the essay. And he talks about this type of ability to be able to come to channeling your energy in this way, and finding that simchas hanefesh, finding that the joy of life in who we are, based on how Chassidus explains it. And he does this in a beautiful way, using many different quotes from the Rebbe, a very powerful letter from the Rebbe to a woman in Tafshin 1956, where he talks about that when you wake up in the morning, talk about snooze, you wake up in the morning, that you wake up in the morning, even though a person may not be complete. The Rebbe writes, even though it's understandable that no person is going to have everything they desire, because that's the way the world was created, nevertheless we're told to say Moida'ani. And this fact that it's asked of us to say that means that we can say it with joy and find the peace with who we are and what our life is about. So that's essay number 1. And of course brings it also into some practical exercises. Essay number 2 is by 5 clear steps to make problems work for you. Menachem Mendel Fromer, age 16. Yeshiva Ketana Tzfas, Haifa, Israel, he comes from. So this one is really taking Chassidus and how Chassidus transformed the way, how Chassidus transforms how we think about this. That problems are solved with the problem itself. That's the central theme. That in the problem you can find the solution. And he brings a number of many examples. He brings from Tanya chapter 31, chapter 29 in Tanya, from the Maimetziyim to B'mishpat Tepoda Memalef and Atat Tzitzava Memalef, and talks about how the 5 steps necessary to look at a problem, to analyze it, to see the positive you can find in it, the solution, and ultimately how the problem itself becomes a catalyst for growth. This is also very well done. It's thorough. It's hard for me to sum up the actual all the steps, but I think when you read it, you'll see the reason that it got such a high mark is because of its practicality as a method, a methodology that we can all employ in our lives. The next and the third essay that we're going to do today is Authentic Joy is Within Reach, and it changes everything. Yeshaya Marantz, age 33, teacher in Tzfas, Israel. In Hebrew, Simcha Ikaron Havadoyes Shaperetz Geder. He takes the 2 themes in Chassidus about joy. One is that it's Ein Simcha Katoras Asfekes. There's no joy as the one that's resolving doubts. And second, that Simcha is Peretz Geder, that it transforms, it transcends boundaries. It breaks through all barriers. And this is a beautiful essay as well, where it really takes and analyzes how simcha, that when you're able to get beyond confusion and beyond doubts, how you suddenly can open up channels that allow you to see things you would never see. How doubts itself trap us from not being able to open up all the opportunities that we really can have in our lives. It's the best way I can sum it up. Well done as well. As I said, these are top essays. They're just fractions of a point lower than the essays that I read last week, the top winners. But they're excellent essays that I would be proud to publish, and we have published it online, and can serve as great catalyst in how we can grow in our own personal lives. In the context of MyLife, Chassidus Applied. So I want to conclude again. We're going to have a very guten Chedosh, and a freilichen Chedosh, even though it's Chedoshia and we count Sfira, but freilich as Alpitera, through all the Pekudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamche Leiv, as the Rebbe says, every way of Simcha we can do a Pitera that we do. And please subscribe to our new channel, MyLife Chassidus Applied, which helps us bring the video to many people and help share these videos with everyone that you come in contact with. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied episode 114. Every Sunday we're here, 8 to 9 p.m. And everyone have a very blessed week. Thank you.